He left my sister everything. I got nothing. A year later, I was a millionaire. Now she wants to sue me. I was never the favorite kid, and honestly, that didn't surprise me one bit. My life felt like the script of some old comedy where the main character always gets handed lemons, while everyone else is enjoying peaches. But this particular lemon turned out to be, well, let's just say it was a bitter little landmine that exploded the moment they read Dad's will. Picture this. There I was, sitting in some stuffy lawyer's office in Richmond, Virginia, listening to my father's final wishes being read out like a grocery list. The mahogany desk was so polished I could see my reflection staring back, and man, did I look lost. My older sister Sarah sat across from me, wearing that smile she'd perfected since we were kids. You know, the one, sweet as apple pie on the surface, but underneath, pure calculation. The lawyer, a thin man who looked like he'd been pressed between the pages of a law book for decades, cleared his throat and began the grand reveal. To my sister went everything that mattered. The house where we grew up, with its wraparound porch and creaking wooden floors that told stories of 4 generations. Dad's thriving carpentry business. 40 years of sawdust, sweat, and satisfied customers who trusted the family name. Even those old, comfortable chairs in the living room that had molded perfectly to Dad's shape over the years. And me? Well, Dad had exactly 0 words about me. Not even a mention. Like I was invisible ink on the family tree. The lawyer finished reading, closed the folder with a definitive snap, and for a moment I thought that was it. 22 years of being someone's son, and I'd been written out of the story entirely. Talk about a participation trophy. I didn't even get to participate. My sister's reaction was immediate and theatrical. She gasped, covered her mouth with her manicured hand, and shook her head like she was witnessing a tragedy. But her eyes? Her eyes were calculating how quickly she could liquidate Dad's legacy. It was like watching someone try to look sad at a funeral while secretly planning the after-party. The silence in that room was thicker than molasses. I sat there feeling like I'd just been erased from existence when the lawyer cleared his throat again. Apparently, there was more. He pulled out another document. Older, yellowed around the edges like an ancient treasure map. His expression shifted from business as usual to something approaching surprise. Turns out my grandfather Jeremy, that old fox with a twinkle in his eye who always seemed to see more than I was showing, had been playing chess while the rest of us were playing checkers. He'd set up a separate living trust 10 years ago, completely independent of Dad's will. The trust had specific conditions. The property would transfer to me automatically upon my father's death, but only if I was over 21 and had completed college. Grandpa Jeremy had left me a patch of sun-baked land in Floyd County, Virginia, an old barn that looked like it had given up on life sometime during the Reagan administration. The lawyer handed me a rusty key like he was presenting me with the crown jewels, explaining that this inheritance was legally bulletproof and completely separate from anything Dad had decided. My sister's face went through more expressions than a theater major's final exam. Shock, confusion, anger, and finally that calculating look I knew so well. She leaned forward, those perfectly painted nails drumming against a mahogany table like she was typing out her objections. Her words came out dripping with fake concern, the kind that's actually worse than straight-up insults. She told me it was just weeds and a pile of junk. What was I going to do with abandoned farmland anyway? Become some kind of gentleman farmer? The way she said it made farming sound like a communicable disease. There was an ounce of anger in her voice, just that refined disdain that cut deeper than any shouting match ever could. In her words, there wasn't a drop of rage, only exquisite contempt that became my catalyst. But here's the thing about being underestimated your whole life. Eventually, it becomes fuel. I walked out of that office carrying nothing but a rusty key and a head full of questions. At 22, I was a college graduate with a degree in business administration that felt about as valuable as a ticket on the Titanic. After it hit the iceberg, of course. My entire worldly possessions fit in one beaten-up suitcase. A few faded photographs, some spare clothes, a T-shirt that had seen more life drama than a soap opera, and exactly $358 in my wallet. Enough to buy some ramen noodles, and maybe a small dream on clearance. The drive to Floyd County took about 2 hours, but it felt like traveling to another dimension. The mountains rolled out before me like green velvet, and the air got cleaner with every mile. When I finally pulled up to what was supposedly my inheritance, I had to laugh. The barn looked like it was held together by hope, duct tape, and sheer stubbornness. But there was something about the place that whispered possibilities instead of problems. Maybe it was the way the afternoon light hit the weatherwood, or how the mountains seemed to embrace the little valley like protective arms. Or maybe I was just desperate enough to see magic in what everyone else saw as decay. See, Grandpa Jeremy was the only person who ever really listened to my stories. While everyone else was focused on practical things like career paths and mortgage rates, he'd sit with me by the creek, sharing tales about the old days and the untapped power of the land. He saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. He used to say something that I dismissed as old man philosophy. Sometimes the most valuable things are hidden in the most unremarkable places. I spent the first hour just walking around, kicking at weeds and trying to imagine what Grandpa Jeremy had seen in this place. The barn leaned to one side like an old man with a bad hip, and the roof had more holes than a government spending plan. But underneath all that neglect, I could sense something solid. Good bones, as Dad would have said about a piece of furniture worth restoring. The barn smelled like mice, dust, and decades-accumulated dreams. I started exploring, moving rusty tools and moth-eaten hay bales, when I spotted something that made my pulse quicken. Tucked away in the corner, almost hidden beneath a tarp that had seen better decades, was an old wooden drawer that looked handmade with the kind of attention to detail that spoke of love rather than necessity. This thing practically called out to me, like it had been waiting my entire life for this moment. Inside that drawer, wrapped in oilcloth like precious artifacts, I found 3 things that would change everything. First, a yellowed envelope with writing I couldn't read. Strange, flowing script that looked like ancient incantations. Second, a small package of dried, onion-like bulbs that seemed ordinary enough to ignore. And third, a sealed packet with handwriting I definitely recognized. The note on the outside was in Grandpa Jeremy's familiar handwriting, the same careful script I remember from birthday cards and fishing trip notes. For Aiden, when you're ready to see what others cannot, do not open without serious intent. The paper felt heavy in my hands, weighted with more than just words. I sat there on an overturned milk crate, surrounded by the ghosts of forgotten harvests, and opened that letter with hands that trembled slightly. Grandpa Jeremy's handwriting filled the page like he was speaking directly from beyond, each word chosen with the precision of a master craftsman. The letter read like a manifesto of faith. These bulbs are real gold, Aiden. Saffron crocus, the most valuable spice on earth. But only for those who know how to wait, who see value in the overlooked, and who are ready to invest their soul. Don't forget why we're here on these Appalachian hills. Look for the spring near the old oak. It will give life. Your grandfather Jeremy, with faith in you. Remember, my boy, land is the best bank, if you know how to use it. I read those words 3 times before they really sank in. Saffron bulbs. My grandfather had left me saffron bulbs and what amounted to a treasure map for success. Most people would have laughed. Hell, most people probably would have thrown the whole mess in the trash and driven back to civilization. But here's what I learned about rock bottom. It's actually a pretty solid foundation to build from. When you've got nothing left to lose, everything starts looking like an opportunity. Those seemingly worthless little bulbs represented something more powerful than agricultural speculation. They were my grandfather's vote of confidence, his belief that I could transform dust into gold. That night, I slept on the floor of the barn, using my jacket as a pillow and listening to the symphony of country sounds I'd forgotten existed. Crickets, distant owls, the whisper of wind through trees that had been standing since before my great-grandfather was born. It was better than any white noise machine or meditation app. I woke up with the sunrise, which is something city living had trained right out of me. But there was something about this place that synced with natural rhythms I didn't even know I still had. The morning light streaming through the barn's gaps created patterns on the floor that looked almost artistic, like the building itself was trying to paint me a picture of possibility. Spending that first full day exploring the property, I began to understand what Grandpa Jeremy had seen. It wasn't just abandoned farmland. It was potential wrapped in neglect, waiting for someone with enough vision and stubbornness to unlock it. The soil, despite years of abandonment, still held richness when I dug down past the surface weeds. The old oak tree he'd mentioned in his letter stood like a guardian in the middle of what had once been a proper field. And near that oak, just like he'd promised, I found a spring, hidden beneath years of overgrowth, but still flowing clear and cold. It was like discovering buried treasure, except this treasure would keep giving forever. Standing there in that field, holding those precious bulbs and feeling the weight of my grandfather's faith, I made a promise. To him, to the land, and to myself. I would prove that what everyone saw as worthless could be transformed into something valuable. I would show them all that sometimes the most important inheritance isn't what fits in a bank statement. The taste of bitterness from that lawyer's office was finally starting to fade, replaced by something that tasted suspiciously like hope mixed with determination. I had my grandfather's land, his wisdom, his mysterious saffron bulbs, and most importantly, his unwavering belief that I could make something extraordinary from what others dismissed as ordinary. Those seemingly worthless little bulbs were about to become my shot at redemption, my bridge to a completely new existence. Maybe they represented what most folks would call blind faith, but I had conviction, and sometimes that's all you need to start a revolution, or at least prove your sister wrong, which felt like a pretty good start. As I stood there watching the sunset behind the Appalachian peaks, painting the sky in colors that would make an Instagram filter jealous, I couldn't help but smile. Everyone thought they knew what this inheritance was worth. They saw abandoned land and a falling down barn. But I was beginning to see something else entirely. The foundation of dreams and the raw material of the impossible. Tomorrow, the real work would begin, and I had a feeling my grandfather's final lesson was just getting started. Tomorrow came with a wake-up call that hit harder than my college alarm clock ever did. Saffron isn't for lazy people. This wasn't just some weekend gardening project or a cute little hobby farm Instagram could romanticize. This was agricultural warfare, and I was about to learn that the land doesn't care about your feelings or your college degree. The first thing I discovered about saffron cultivation is that it demands everything from you: patience, labor, knowledge you didn't even know existed. I was digging soil, analyzing pH levels, studying drainage patterns like I was preparing for a NASA mission to Mars. My hands developed calluses that looked like abstract art painted in pain, and my legs ached from constant standing like I was working double shifts at a factory. Those first weeks were brutal in ways I hadn't anticipated. I was pulling rocks out of ground that seemed to have been planted there by giants, creating furrows with my bare hands until they bled, then spending my evenings reading agricultural journals about saffron varieties I'd never heard of. Words like crocus sativus and corn propagation became my new vocabulary. This was my personal battlefield, and I was determined to win the war. Every morning I'd wake up before sunrise, not because I wanted to, but because something inside me had shifted. The land was calling the shots now, and I was learning to listen. I'd stumble out of the barn where I'd made a makeshift bedroom, grab some instant coffee that tasted like liquid disappointment, and get back to work on transforming this forgotten patch of Appalachian soil into something extraordinary. During those long days of backbreaking labor, I found myself remembering Grandpa Jeremy's words from our fishing trips down by the lake. He used to say something that made more sense now than it ever had before. Land always pays back those who respect it. It's like an old friend. The more you give, the more you get. His voice became my compass, my silent partner in this crazy project that everyone else thought was doomed to failure. The old man had understood something about the relationship between human effort and natural reward that takes most people a lifetime to figure out. Every blister on my hands, every ache in my back, every drop of sweat that hit the soil felt like I was making a deposit in an account that would eventually pay dividends. But if the physical work was challenging, dealing with the local farming community was downright entertaining. The guys at the Rusty Mug, the local diner that served as unofficial headquarters for agricultural gossip, watched me like I was some exotic species that had crawled out from under a rock. Their collective wisdom boiled down to barely conceal mockery, disguised as friendly concern. They'd sit there nursing their coffee and making observations that were about as subtle as a freight train. Comments about the city boy planting mystery bulbs for soup or wondering if the recent rain had somehow damaged my brain. One particularly charming fellow suggested I might be looking for trouble in all the wrong places, like saffron farming was some kind of dangerous hobby for people with too much time and too little sense. I just smiled and nodded, keeping my thoughts to myself. Let them laugh, I figured. After all, the best laugh is always the last one. These were good people at heart, but they were also creatures of habit who'd been growing the same crops in the same ways for generations. Innovation wasn't exactly their strong suit, and I couldn't blame them for being skeptical of something they'd never seen before. Being probably the first person in Floyd County history to attempt commercial saffron cultivation was either going to make me a pioneer or a cautionary tale. The jury was still out on which category I belonged in, but every day that passed without giving up felt like a small victory against the doubters. Just when I was starting to think my only meaningful conversations would be with my blistered hands, fate decided to throw me a curveball that changed everything. Her name was Sarah, and she showed up like something out of a Turning Point scene. Not dramatic, just quietly right. The kind of presence that shifts things without making a big production about it. Sarah was an agricultural student from Virginia Tech, completing some kind of internship requirement that had landed her in rural Floyd County. She wasn't just another helper. She was a ray of genuine sunlight in a world that had been pretty cloudy for months. Her eyes burned with curiosity about everything agricultural, and somehow, impossibly, she believed in my crazy saffron project more than I believed in it myself. Where the local farmers saw soup ingredients and questionable life choices, Sarah saw potential gold. She looked at my carefully planted bulbs and started talking about market opportunities, export potential, and something she called artisanal agricultural products. She spoke my grandfather's language of possibility, but with the modern vocabulary of someone who understood both tradition and innovation. She became more than just an assistant or a cheerleader. Sarah was my intellectual partner, the person who could see the vision I was trying to build and help make it reality. She embodied that perfect phrase about vision and action. Vision without action is just hallucination, but action without vision is a nightmare. We had both, and that combination felt unstoppable. One of the first practical things Sarah helped me tackle was restoring the old spring near the oak tree that Grandpa Jeremy had mentioned in his letter. The locals had forgotten it even existed, but she approached it like an archaeological project. Water quality tests, proper legal registration for water rights, environmental impact assessments. She turned my grandfather's cryptic treasure map into actionable modern agriculture. When she knelt down by that spring and said, "The land is breathing," Aiden, her words sounded like a prayer. She understood what my grandfather had been trying to tell me, but she could translate his old-school wisdom into contemporary terms that made practical sense. Sarah also brought something I hadn't expected: social media savvy. She started documenting our progress, creating videos about what she called gold on American soil. Her content wasn't just pretty pictures. It was storytelling that connected traditional farming wisdom with modern agricultural innovation. She made our little saffron experiment feel like part of something bigger, more significant than just one guy trying to prove his sister wrong. The videos started getting attention. Not viral exactly, but steady interest from people who appreciated the story we were telling. Comments from fellow farmers, culinary enthusiasts, people who understood that real quality takes time and effort. It felt like we were building something more than just a crop. We were building a community of people who believed in doing things the right way. Then something magical started happening. Those tiny saffron bulbs I'd planted with more hope than knowledge began showing signs of life. First came small green shoots, then delicate purple flowers that looked like tiny stars pushing through the earth. Each new bloom felt like a personal victory, proof that my grandfather's faith hadn't been misplaced and that all those weeks of backbreaking labor were actually leading somewhere. I'd wake up each morning and rush to check on the progress, counting new blooms like a miser counting coins. Sarah would meet me there most mornings, and we'd walk to the rows together, discussing harvest timing and processing techniques and market strategies. Those early morning conversations, surrounded by purple flowers and morning mist, were some of the happiest moments I'd had in years. But just as things were starting to feel like they might actually work out, my past decided to make an unwelcome appearance. My sister showed up on the farm like a dark cloud rolling in before a thunderstorm. She emerged from her expensive SUV wearing clothes that cost more than my monthly grocery budget and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She looked around the property like she was appraising it for auction, her gaze lingering on the purple flowers with barely concealed calculation. This wasn't a family visit driven by sisterly concern or curiosity about my agricultural experiment. This was reconnaissance, and I could feel the tension radiating from her like heat from asphalt in August. It didn't take long to figure out what had brought her to my little corner of Virginia. Sarah's Gold on American Soil videos had started gaining serious traction, racking up hundreds of thousands of views, and attracting attention from food bloggers and agricultural journalists. My sister had always been good at sniffing out opportunities, and apparently, she caught wind of something that smelled like profit. The conversation that followed was a masterclass in manipulation disguised as family concern. She started talking about partnership opportunities, combining our resources, leveraging her business connections to help scale up the operation. Her voice was honey-sweet, but I could taste the poison underneath every word. Then came the legal intimidation. She started waving around papers and talking about technical irregularities in Grandpa Jeremy's trust, claiming some clerical inconsistency with the witness signatures or notarization date. The subtext was clear. Give me a piece of your success, or I'll make your life legally complicated. Her exact words were delivered with that perfect blend of fake concern and implied threat that she perfected over the years. Something about how surely I didn't want to get into a legal battle with my own sister, right? How maybe we could work something out that would be beneficial for both of us. The sweetness in her voice was more dangerous than any shouting match could have been. But here's the thing about spending months doing physical labor and building something from nothing. It changes you in ways you don't expect. I wasn't that confused 22-year-old kid sitting in a lawyer's office anymore. I'd developed actual calluses, both physical and emotional. I'd learned the satisfaction of creating something valuable through pure effort and determination. I looked at her, then at Sarah, then at the purple flowers that represented months of sweat and faith and stubbornness. The response that came out of my mouth surprised even me with its certainty and strength. I told her that I wasn't that same kid anymore, that this land represented more than just real estate or business opportunity. It was my chance, my inheritance, my choice. And I wasn't giving it up, not to anyone, and certainly not to someone who'd ripped me off when I had nothing. The transformation in her expression was immediate and ugly. The fake concern melted away like makeup in rain, replaced by the cold calculation I remembered from our childhood. She realized that her usual tactics weren't going to work, that the dynamic between us had shifted in ways she hadn't anticipated. Sarah didn't say a word, but her presence spoke louder than any legal argument my sister could make. She stood like a root sunk deep in that stubborn Appalachian soil, unmoving, unwavering. Her quiet strength reminded me that I wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. After my sister left, spinning gravel in her expensive SUV and leaving behind the kind of angry energy that takes hours to dissipate, Sarah and I stood among the purple flowers and processed what had just happened. The confrontation had been unpleasant, but it had also been clarifying. I'd drawn a line in the soil, literally and figuratively, and there was no going back. We spent the rest of that day working in comfortable silence, tending to the saffron plants and preparing for the harvest that was still weeks away. The physical work felt therapeutic after the emotional intensity of the morning, and I found myself thinking about how much I'd changed since inheriting this land. That evening, as we watched the sun set behind the mountains and turn the sky into a palette of colors that rivaled our purple flowers, Sarah made an observation that stuck with me. She said that sometimes the best fertilizer for growth is challenge, that plants and people both get stronger when they have to fight for what they want. The first major test was behind us, but I had a feeling that bigger challenges were coming. Success has a way of attracting attention, both good and bad, and we were just getting started on this journey. The saffron was growing, the videos were gaining momentum, and my sister now knew that her little brother wasn't going to be pushed around anymore. But for that moment, sitting among the purple flowers with someone who believed in the vision as much as I did, everything felt possible. The hard work was paying off, literally and figuratively. The land was responding to our care, the plants were thriving, and I was become the person my grandfather had somehow known I could be. The path to real gold was proving to be exactly as challenging as he'd warned, but it was also more rewarding than I'd ever imagined. The fields were blooming, but so was I, not into someone new, but into who I was always meant to become. The fields were blooming, but so was trouble. My sister's legal threats weren't just empty words floating in mountain air. They were real problems that needed real solutions. Sarah and I knew we had to act fast before her lawyers could find some loophole to exploit, some technicality that could unravel everything Grandpa Jeremy had carefully constructed. We decided to take a road trip to Richmond, the kind of mission that felt part detective work, part legal archaeology. Our goal was simple: find someone who could testify to my grandfather's true intentions and put this inheritance dispute to bed once and for all. The drive through Virginia's rolling hills gave us time to strategize, but mostly we just tried to stay optimistic while preparing for the worst. That's when we found Mr. Harold Pemberton, a notary who'd been working in Richmond since the Carter administration. This guy was old school in the best possible way, the kind of professional who kept meticulous records and actually remembered his clients as people, not just signatures on documents. When we mentioned Grandpa Jeremy's name, his weathered face lit up with genuine recognition. Mr. Pemberton pulled out files that looked like they belonged in a museum, but his memory was sharp as a razor. He told us stories about my grandfather that I'd never heard, about how the old man had been incredibly deliberate about setting up that trust. According to Harold, Grandpa Jeremy had specifically said he was looking out for the boy who saw with his heart instead of his eyes. Those words hit me harder than I expected. My grandfather had seen something in me that even I didn't know existed back then. Mr. Pemberton's testimony was exactly what we needed: official documentation that my inheritance was rock solid and legally bulletproof. It was a temporary victory, but we both knew the real battle was just getting started. There's always someone who wants to take a bite out of your pie, especially when that pie starts looking profitable. The relief I felt driving back toward Floyd County was intoxicating. We'd handled the legal threat. The saffron was growing beautifully, and for the first time in months, I actually felt like we might pull this crazy experiment off. Sarah was making plans for the upcoming harvest, talking about processing techniques and market strategies that made our little operation sound almost professional. But life has a way of reminding you that victory laps should probably wait until you actually cross the finish line. We were about an hour outside Floyd, just starting to see the familiar lights of town twinkling in the distance like scattered promises. We saw something that made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. Smoke, not the gentle wisps you get from someone's fireplace or a controlled burn in the distance. This was thick, black, acrid smoke rising up from exactly the direction of my farm. The kind of smoke that means something important is being destroyed. My heart dropped into my stomach and stayed there. The closer we got, the more obvious it became that this wasn't some random brush fire or neighboring farmer's burn pile. This smoke was coming from my fields, from my dreams, from everything I've been building for the past several months. The air itself seemed to get heavier with each mile, carrying the smell of destruction and betrayal. Sarah grabbed my hand as we pulled into the driveway, both of us staring at what used to be rows of carefully tended saffron plants. Now it looked like a war zone. Blackened earth stretched across what had been purple flowers just that morning. The fire department was still there, hosing down hot spots and making sure the flames wouldn't spread to the surrounding forest. The fire chief, a tired-looking man with soot-streaked cheeks and sad eyes, confirmed what we already knew but didn't want to believe. This was an accident. Someone had deliberately set this fire, using what looked like accelerant to make sure it burned hot and fast. His exact words were colder than the ashes still smoldering in my field. Someone wanted us to understand that our saffron wasn't welcome here. Whoever did this had been watching, waiting for the one day we weren't here. The timing wasn't coincidence. It was calculated malice. Standing there among the ruins of months of backbreaking work, I felt something inside me break in a way I'd never experienced before. This wasn't just property damage or agricultural sabotage. This was someone trying to kill my dreams before they could fully take root. The violation felt personal in a way that made my hands shake with rage and helplessness. That's when I remembered the look in Mr. Higgs' eyes. Our neighbor, the old farmer who lived about a quarter mile down the road, had been giving me strange stares ever since I'd started working the land. His expression had been a mixture of envy and resentment that I'd been too focused on my own work to fully register. Now, standing in the ashes of my dreams, I also remembered something Mr. Pemberton had mentioned back in Richmond. Something about my father making informal promises to neighbors about this land before my grandfather had stepped in with the official trust. Higgs must have been counting on buying this plot cheap when my father eventually sold it, only to watch some kid from the city turn it into something profitable instead. Some people don't forgive success, especially when they think it should have been theirs, even when that success comes from blood, sweat, and more determination than good sense. I couldn't prove it was him, but the timing felt awfully convenient, and that look in his eyes had been burning with more than just neighborly curiosity. I sat down right there in the middle of the charred field, everything I'd worked for reduced to ash and disappointment. This was rock bottom of the basement, and I just crashed through the floor. It felt like life was asking me if I really thought this was going to be easy, if I'd actually believed that someone like me could turn dust into gold without consequences. But then Sarah did something that probably saved my sanity and maybe my entire future. She sat down next to me in that burned field, put her arms around me, and said words that were stronger than any wall I'd ever leaned against. She told me that saffron survives in stone, that I would survive this too, that we would survive this together. Her voice was steady and sure when she explained that sometimes everything has to burn down before you can build something truly strong. This wasn't the end of our story. It was just the end of the first chapter. Her words became my lifeline in that moment, showing me that even when everything looks hopeless, someone believing in you can make all the difference. The strongest people, she said, are the ones who can smile through tears because they know there's always tomorrow. That hit me like a revelation wrapped in a hug. I'd been so focused on what I'd lost that I'd forgotten what I still had. The land, the knowledge I'd gained, Sarah's partnership, and my grandfather's unwavering faith echoing from beyond the grave. We spent that night planning our comeback, instead of mourning our losses. The decision to start over wasn't just the only option available. It was the right option. If someone thought they could scare me off my own land with a little arson, they'd seriously underestimated the stubborn streak I'd inherited from both sides of my family tree. That's when Grandpa Jeremy pulled his final rabbit out of the hat. While we were cleaning up the barn and trying to figure out how to fund a complete restart, I noticed something odd about one section of the floor. A few boards seemed newer than the others, and when I pried them up, I found an old tin box hidden underneath a pile of rusty tools. Inside that box was enough cash to make me dizzy, along with a note in my grandfather's familiar handwriting. The message was simple but profound. This was for the Black Day, for when it seemed like everything was lost. He hoped I'd use it when defeat felt inevitable, and he wanted me to remember that real values never burn. That old fox had been playing chess while the rest of us were still learning checkers. He'd anticipated that success would bring enemies, that someone would try to destroy what we were building. His foresight felt like a message from beyond, a reminder that he'd always been one step ahead, and that he prepared for this exact scenario. Finding that money was like discovering a secret weapon just when the battle seemed lost. It wasn't just the financial resources. It was proof that my grandfather believed so deeply in this project that he planned for its most dangerous moments. The man had been a strategic genius disguised as a simple mountain farmer. Sarah's response to this windfall was pure inspiration. She took our tragedy and turned it into fuel for something bigger than either of us had imagined. Her crowdfunding campaign through social media wasn't just about raising money. It was about telling a story that resonated with people across the country. The video she created from the ashes and smoke, showing the first new saffron shoots already pushing to the burned soil, went viral in ways we never expected. People weren't just watching agricultural content. They were witnessing a story about resilience, hope, and what she called the authentic American spirit. Comments poured in from people who understood that this wasn't just about growing expensive spices. This was about fighting for your dreams when someone tries to burn them down. This was about refusing to quit when quitting would be the logical choice. This was about proving that sometimes the best response to destruction is immediate, defiant reconstruction. The support was overwhelming in the best possible way. Donations came from chefs who wanted to support American-grown saffron, From farmers who'd face their own sabotage, from people who just believed in the idea that hard work and determination should win over jealousy and destruction. We weren't just rebuilding a saffron farm. We were building a community of believers. Within 3 months, we weren't just back. We were bigger, stronger, and more rooted than ever. The fire that was meant to destroy us became the spark that ignited our greatest growth. Ironically, our saboteur had handed us a story that no marketing campaign could ever buy. Rebirth from ashes that captured people's imagination and opened their hearts and wallets. Working those fields again felt different this time. Every bulb we planted carried the weight of everyone who believed in our comeback story. Every row we created was a middle finger to whoever had tried to destroy our future. Every day we spent rebuilding was proof that some dreams are too stubborn to stay buried, even when someone literally tries to burn them out of existence. Sarah and I developed a rhythm that felt almost choreographed. She'd handle the social media updates and community engagement, while I focused on the actual farming work that was starting to feel like second nature. We were becoming a genuine team in ways that went far beyond business partnership or romantic relationship. The new saffron plants grew with what seemed like supernatural determination. Maybe it was the enriched soil from the ash, maybe it was our improved technique, or maybe it was just the universe's way of balancing the scales after we'd been knocked down so hard. Whatever the reason, those purple flowers emerged stronger and more vibrant than our first attempt had ever been. Looking back at those flames now, I can see they serve a purpose I couldn't understand at the time. They burn away my naivety about how the world works, my assumption that everyone would be happy about my success, my belief that hard work alone would be enough to guarantee results. But they didn't burn away the things that really mattered. My grandfather's wisdom, Sarah's faith, or my own stubborn refusal to give up. The fire had been meant to end our story, but instead became the crucible that forged something stronger than what we'd started with. From the ashes of betrayal, we built something that couldn't be destroyed by jealousy or sabotage because it was rooted in community support and unshakable determination. As autumn approached and our first real harvest loomed on the horizon, I finally understood what my grandfather had meant about the best things growing from the deepest soil. Sometimes that soil has to be scorched clean before it can nurture something truly valuable. Sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what you're really capable of building. The flames of betrayal had tested us in ways I never could have imagined, but we'd emerged from that trial stronger, smarter, and more committed than ever. Now it was time to show the world what real saffron gold looked like when it grew from American soil, enriched with equal parts determination and ashes. The flames of betrayal had tested us, but now it was time to show the world what real saffron gold looked like. Our first real harvest arrived with autumn colors painting the mountains, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous as hell. Everything we'd been through, my sister's threats, the fire, the sleepless nights rebuilding from scratch, it all came down to these next few weeks. Walking through those fields of purple flowers at dawn felt like stepping into a dream I'd almost given up on. Each bloom was perfect, almost too beautiful to disturb. But this wasn't about admiring pretty flowers anymore. This was about proving that American soil could produce something the world had never seen before. Harvesting saffron is like performing surgery with your fingertips. You have to pluck each delicate stigma from the center of the crocus flower. And you have to do it fast because the window for peak quality is measured in hours, not days. Sarah and I developed a rhythm that felt almost meditative, her handling the documentation and quality control, while I focused on the actual picking. Every petal, every stigma felt like a piece of my story, my struggle, my transformation. I'd wanted to run away from this dust, from the dirt, from farm life that I considered a relic of the past. Instead, I'd found myself, my calling, my real goal in the very thing I tried to escape. The irony wasn't lost on me that the city boy had become more of a farmer than anyone in Floyd County. When we finally weighed our first commercial harvest, the numbers made my head spin. 3.7 pounds of the purest saffron I'd ever seen. To put that in perspective, it takes about 150 flowers to produce just 1 gram of saffron. We'd processed over 250,000 individual flowers by hand. My fingers were stained purple for weeks, but they were the most beautiful stains I'd ever worn. The market response was immediate and overwhelming. We were selling wholesale at $3,000 per pound and retail at $20 per gram in these gorgeous little glass jars that Sarah had designed. Each jar carried a facsimile of Grandpa Jeremy's handwriting with our brand name, Old Dervish Gold. It wasn't just a product name. It was a tribute to his faith, his legacy, his belief in turning the impossible into the inevitable. Registering that trademark felt like planting a flag on conquered territory. We weren't just local farmers anymore. We were a legitimate business with a brand that meant something. The Eco Fair in Denver was our coming out party, the moment we realized just how special our product really was. People weren't just impressed by the quality. They were moved by the story, inspired by the spirit behind every jar. Food bloggers started calling us artisanal agriculture at its finest. Chefs from restaurants I'd only seen on TV were placing orders. Food Network reached out about featuring our story. We'd gone from agricultural experiment to genuine business faster than I could have imagined possible. The financial transformation was even more dramatic. By the end of our second season, we cleared $180,000 in pure profit. This wasn't just good money. This was proof that dreams really do come true if you're willing to work hard enough and smart enough to make them reality. We invested in proper drying equipment, expanded our growing area, and hired 2 local farmers who'd once laughed at our crazy saffron project. Watching those same guys who'd mocked the city boy now asking for jobs was satisfying in ways I can't adequately describe. Sometimes the best revenge really is massive success. But success also brought new challenges. After another failed arson attempt, smaller this time, more like amateur hour vandalism, we installed security cameras throughout the property. I told Sarah that I finally understood what jealousy looked like. It hides in shadows and fears the light. Some people just can't stand watching others succeed, especially when that success makes their own limitations more obvious. The cameras were worth every penny, not just for security, but for peace of mind. We could focus on growing our business instead of constantly looking over our shoulders. Though I have to admit, there was something darkly amusing about catching our wannabe saboteur on video, stumbling around in the dark like a discount supervillain. Sarah, brilliant strategist that she'd become, started developing plans that made my head spin with their ambition. She wanted to expand into export markets, Canada, European Union, positioning our product as premium organic saffron from the pristine Blue Ridge Mountains. Her vision was global in scope, but rooted in our local story. She had this way of explaining our mission that made it sound almost poetic. Our saffron wasn't just a spice. It was history, quality, the American dream concentrated into every single jar. She was right, of course. We weren't just selling a product. We were selling the idea that excellence could emerge from the most unlikely places. By our second year, we'd earned $520,000. The transformation was complete. I'd gone from being the family disappointment to the Appalachian Saffron Kid, a nickname that felt a hell of a lot better than anything I'd been called growing up. Sometimes you just have to prove everyone wrong, and the best way to do that is with results they can't argue with. The respect in people's voices when they talked about our operation was addictive. We'd become a success story that small communities loved to claim as their own. Floyd County had gone from tolerating our weird agricultural experiment to proudly calling us their hometown heroes. That's when my sister decided to make another appearance, this time wearing a smile that looked like it had been glued to her face but somehow never reached her eyes. She showed up talking about partnership opportunities, synergistic effects, stocks and investments, the future of our family legacy. Her voice dripped honey, but I could taste the bitterness underneath every word. The conversation was surreal in its shamelessness. She actually suggested combining our businesses, leveraging her connections to help us scale up operations. The woman who'd written me off as worthless when I had nothing now wanted to be my business partner when I had everything. The audacity was almost impressive. But I wasn't that confused kid sitting in a lawyer's office anymore. I developed calluses, both physical and emotional. I'd learned what real work felt like, what genuine accomplishment tasted like, what it meant to build something valuable from absolutely nothing. Her proposal felt like an insult to everything I'd sacrificed to get here. My response was calm, measured, and absolutely final. I reminded her that she'd had family when it mattered, when I needed support and belief. All I'd had was dust, dirt, and an old man's faith in my potential. That dust had given me more than she could ever imagine, more than her inheritance had given her. I'd found my path, and she'd apparently lost hers a long time ago. Watching her drive away for what I knew would be the last time felt like closing a chapter one should have finished years earlier. The past was finally past. The person who'd once made me feel small and worthless no longer had any power over my present or future. Success hadn't just changed my bank account. It had changed who I was at my core. Sarah and I stood in our flourishing fields, breathing in the scent of success that smelled remarkably like purple flowers and mountain air. We'd built something together that couldn't be bought, couldn't be inherited, couldn't be stolen. We created it through determination, partnership, and the kind of stubborn faith that my grandfather had somehow seen in me before I saw in myself. The Appalachian Mountains stretched out around us like protective arms, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt completely at home, not just in the place, but in my own skin and my choices, in the life I'd built from scratch. The boy who'd wanted to escape the dust had become a man who'd learned to turn that dust into gold. The greatest treasures really aren't what you find, they're what you create. And we were just getting started. The greatest treasures really aren't what you find, they're what you create. And by our third season, what we created was nothing short of miraculous. 6 acres of Virginia mountain land covered in purple saffron flowers that looked like a velvet carpet of dreams stretching toward the Blue Ridge peaks. The numbers still make me shake my head in disbelief. $1.1 million in profit. Who could have imagined that dust could transform into gold? Not just metaphorical gold, but the kind that pays mortgages, builds futures, and proves that sometimes the craziest dreams are just disguised as the most sensible plans. The transformation in how people treated us was almost as dramatic as our financial success. The same farming cooperative that had once laughed at the crazy city boy and his mysterious bulbs now proudly called our brand Floyd County Gold. We'd gone from local curiosity to hometown heroes, from agricultural experiment to regional pride. Sometimes you just have to show people that you're not just a dreamer. You're a magician who can turn vision into reality. The respect in their voices when they talked about our operation was worth more than any apology they could have offered for their early skepticism. Success gave us opportunities I'd never imagined. We established the Jeremy Thompson Memorial Scholarship for farming kids from Appalachian communities who dreamed of college but lacked the resources to make it happen. Grandpa Jeremy always said that real wealth is what you can give away to others, and creating that scholarship felt like the most important thing I'd ever done with money. Standing at the scholarship ceremony, watching these bright young faces light up with possibility, I finally understood what my grandfather had been trying to teach me all along. Success isn't just about personal achievement. It's about using your good fortune to lift up the next generation. The kids receiving those scholarships had the same hungry look in their eyes that I probably had when I first held those saffron bulbs. But the most important wealth we'd accumulated couldn't be measured in dollars or acres. Sarah and I had built something together that transcended business partnership or even romantic love. We created a life that felt purposeful, sustainable, and deeply rooted in both the land and our shared values. On a crisp October morning, with the harvest nearly complete and the mountains painted in colors that rivaled our purple flowers, I made a decision that felt as natural as breathing. In the same field where flames of betrayal had once threatened to destroy everything, surrounded by thousands of saffron blooms swaying gently in the mountain breeze, I asked Sarah to marry me. The words came from somewhere deeper than my mind, straight from the heart that she'd helped heal and strengthen. I told her that she'd seen something in me that nobody else could see, that she stood by me when everything was literally burning down around us. She'd been my light in the darkness, my anchor in the storm, my partner in building something impossible into something inevitable. Without her, this dust would never become saffron. Without her belief, my grandfather's faith would have been wasted on someone too scared to take the risks that real success demands. She wasn't just my business partner or my girlfriend. She was my true gold, the treasure that made all the other treasures meaningful. Her response was pure Sarah, practical wisdom wrapped in genuine emotion. Her smile was brighter than sunshine over our fields, and her words carried the same steady strength that had carried us through every challenge we'd faced. She told me that she'd simply seen the gold that was already there, waiting to be discovered. I'd been the one who'd done the digging, the planting, the believing when belief felt impossible. Now we were going to grow that gold together, season after season, year after year. Her yes felt like the final piece of a puzzle I'd been working on my entire life, without knowing what the picture was supposed to look like. Planning our wedding became another adventure in creative problem solving. We decided to hold the ceremony right there in the saffron fields, with the Blue Ridge Mountains as our cathedral and the purple flowers as our carpet. It felt like the only appropriate setting for two people who'd literally grown their love from the same soil that had given us our livelihood. The guest list wrote itself. Farming families who become our extended community, customers who become friends, agriculture extension agents who'd helped us navigate the technical challenges of our unusual crop. Even some of the guys from the Rusty Mug showed up, probably curious to see if the crazy saffron project would produce a crazy saffron wedding. The ceremony was simple, meaningful, and perfectly us. No fancy venue rentals or imported flowers. Just two people making promises surrounded by the work of their hands and the beauty of the land that had brought them together. When the minister pronounced us husband and wife, the applause echoed off the mountains like nature itself was celebrating our union. Our honeymoon was a working vacation, a trip to Spain to study traditional saffron cultivation methods and explore export opportunities. Leave it to us to turn our romantic getaway into agricultural research. But that's what happens when your passion becomes your profession, and your profession becomes your life's work. Coming home to Floyd County as a married couple felt like completing a circle that had started when I first held those mysterious bulbs in my grandfather's letter. The land looked the same, but everything felt different, more permanent, more purposeful, more like we were building something that could last for generations. We started making plans that stretched beyond the next harvest season. Expansion possibilities, value-added products, maybe even a small processing facility that could serve other specialty crop farmers in the region. Sarah had ideas about agrotourism, cooking classes, farm-to-table dinners that would showcase not just our saffron, but the entire agricultural heritage of Appalachian communities. The fourth season brought challenges we hadn't anticipated, good problems, but still problems. Demand was outstripping our production capacity, and we were getting inquiries from distributors across the country. We had to make decisions about growth versus quality, expansion versus sustainability, success versus maintaining the intimate connection to the land that had made our success possible in the first place. We decided to grow carefully, deliberately, in ways that honored both our grandfather's wisdom and our own hard-earned experience. Some opportunities we pursued, others we politely declined. We learned that not every door you can open is a door you should walk through. 5 years after inheriting a patch of abandoned land and a box of mysterious bulbs, we were running a $1 million agricultural operation that employed 12 people and had become a symbol of rural economic development for the entire region. State agricultural officials used us as a case study. Business schools sent students to interview us about entrepreneurship and sustainable agriculture. But the measure of our success that meant the most to me was much simpler. When I walked through our fields in the early morning, breathing in the scent of saffron flowers and mountain air, I felt completely at peace with who I'd become and what we'd built together. The boy who'd wanted to escape the dust had become a man who'd learned that dust could be transformed into gold with enough faith, work, and love. The inheritance I thought was worthless had become the foundation of a life more valuable than anything money could buy. Standing in those purple fields with Sarah beside me, watching the sun rise over Blue Ridge Mountains and thinking about my grandfather's letter still tucked away in our safe, I finally understood the real message he'd been trying to send me. Some gold doesn't glitter, but it smells like dreams, grows like hope, and lasts like love. They thought it was dust. I proved it was gold. Real farm, real product, real victory. And the best part? We were just getting started on the next chapter of a story that would probably surprise us as much as it had surprised everyone else. Sometimes finding your place in the world requires looking down at your feet, and sometimes it requires looking under an old floorboard in a barn where love masquerades as abandoned tools and wisdom disguises itself as worthless dirt.